Hey, today we're doing a little work on the Corvair. And the thing that we're going to do is replace the existing lower control arms with relocated and hopefully much improved custom lower control arms. So, on the Corvair, if you're not familiar already, these are the lower control arms. Now these are already aftermarket pieces. These are actually sold by a Corvette aftermarket supplier. They're just fairly simple polyurethane bushed U-joint, or almost like a Heim joint, but with a polyurethane bushing on each end, and then the adjustable tube in the middle, which is great for adjustment, but unfortunately for an aggressively driven car, I've found these to be really unsuitable. They're, I think, too soft. I think the bushings are too soft, and because they're not the right width, they don't quite fit properly. You have to space them out with washers, and the washers, I think, end up hogging out the urethane bushings over time. And the end result is a lot of funny movement in the rear suspension in ways that you don't want, and other untoward noises happening all the time back there. So these are going to get replaced today. I'll show you the new bits in a moment. Also, the pivot point I'm going to move. So this bracket is an aftermarket bracket for the Corvairs, made originally by Auto Performance Parts, and it relocates the original pivot point for this arm was actually up a little higher. It relocates it lower so that it's kept parallel with the axle. In this case, on a Corvair, the axle actually kind of serves as the upper arm in the rear suspension. So these are kept in parallel, which logically seems like it would improve handling, but in fact, most of the racers will tell you it probably makes it worse, almost certainly makes it worse, because you lose the camber gain under compression. So with this hole a little bit higher and the pivot point a little bit higher, as the rear suspension compresses, you actually get some camber gain. You get some negative camber added, and that under heavy cornering loads is a good thing. And that's something that I would like to have back. So relocate the holes, replace the arms, and hopefully that'll do what we need to do today. Okay, a quick lesson in the way the stock Corvair stuff is set up. I don't have a stock arm anymore to show you, like this strut rod or this lower control arm. I foolishly sold mine some years ago after I went to the aftermarket stuff. But this is approximately what a stock bolt looks like normally for the back end here. And you can see, hopefully, that it's got a flat spot in it. And that is to retain this special washer. So this goes through the strut rod, and then by virtue of that washer, as you rotate, it'll change the position in the slot, thereby lengthening or shortening the rod to give you a little bit of negative camber adjustment. It works okay, stock, obviously, to give you a little bit of adjustment. A lot of cars, especially in the 60s, set up that way. But obviously having the threaded joints on the end of the tubes and threaded tube in between gives you quite a bit more adjustment, which we like. Now, also, the stock pieces fit into this area right here, right? These are the aftermarket Corvette pieces. As you can see, they don't fit great. So you end up having to take up all that slop with spacers, or in my case, because I'm cheap and stupid, washers. So I stacked a bunch of washers on either side of it and ran all the way through. Now, it should be a perfectly acceptable method for retaining this. However, you'll notice like these urethane bushings here are marked up pretty badly because the washers, don't cover the entire outside surface of that bushing. So they don't give you a great, surface to retain. And so it ends up kind of chewing into that bushing, and the whole thing just moves a lot more than you would like. There's just a lot more kind of squirming and movement, and you can really feel that in the rear suspension. Also, you'll notice that these holes are 5/8 diameter, and the bolt that goes through them is 1/2 inch diameter. So there's a lot of, seaming slop there. Well, these special washers come on the Corvair original strut rods. These original ones are the same way. They're intended to fit inside like the inner diameter of this strut rod and then fit tight on the outside of the bolt. So they slide onto the bolt like that and then give it a tight fit inside the strut rod. Well, of course, in these Corvette pieces, they don't fit down inside that bore because the bore is not quite as big as the stock Corvair setup. So again, it's just tough to get these things to actually fit properly. Otherwise, you end up like the bolt just going through it has a ton of slop. This thing has a ton of slop. By the time you deal with all that, it's just hard to get the kind of control that you want. So these custom little babies, made by Tom Knoblauch, a guy that does a lot of head work and other machine work for Corvairs, he just started producing these things, and I love the way he had them set up. So it's obviously, you can see here, it's designed to fit properly inside that stock Corvair bracket there where that goes. Then you can also see that he's properly machined the ends to accept these stock special washers. So you get that nice fit for a 1/2 inch bolt going through there. Now I'm waiting a little bit to get these installed. Tomorrow I should have fresh 1/2 inch bolts. Why would I need 1/2 inch bolts, you ask? Well, here's the other challenge of this setup. So the aftermarket or the replacement parts that you can get for these now are made out of, even though they're like grade 8 bolts, or appear to be like grade 8 bolts, or at least zinc plated like grade 8s would be. So you can get you some better light here. They do not, the threads on them are much softer than the original bolts from GM. Now, as you might imagine, the original bolts from GM, after 60 years living in the lower suspension like that, are often rusty and crusty and tough to get out. So it's hard to find a good set of original bolts, and the new ones have very soft threads. And these things, stock, have to hold a tremendous amount of pressure. They've really got a lot of force on them there in that rear suspension, and it's easy for them to want to wiggle and move and rotate under load unless you've got a lot of clamping force on them. And when you put all that clamping force on there, 80 plus foot-pounds of torque, tends to rip the threads right off of them. And you can see on this one, hopefully, I lost the threads on this guy. So, and those flat-sided bolts are expensive, but also unnecessary now that I've got adjustment in the threaded arm. So, new, regular old 1/2 inch bolts, coarse thread, grade 8, should take all the torque I can throw at them. And in fact, I don't need to even throw that much torque at them, because we'll just make sure with some little plates here that the bolts stay in the middle of that control arm space, that the control arms don't move. There's no lateral movement this way in that slot, and that actually won't take a lot of torque, because we want to let it, to the extent that it wants to rotate a little bit, we want to let it do that. So, and then Tom's even provided a nice little grease zerk on there, so we'll make sure we face those down so we can reach those and get a little grease in there too, make sure they move nice and free. So hopefully no binding, but all the control a man could ever want in his rear suspension. let's get a sense of what we're working with here. So this is always the challenge with this bracket, and I don't know how many times I've done this. I've never yet figured out the right way to do it. Maybe somebody out there has the right way and they'll tell me after I've got this solved. But there's 4 bolts at each side of the bracket. Well, you see one up here, and there's 2 under here, and there's 1 more up here in this little ear up here. So I've got 3 of those bolts in, right? So surely, since it's up tight against the transaxle, surely that 4th bolt must be close, right? Oh no, my friend. It is not. Not that close at all. Same challenge on the other side. 1 in, 2, 3 in. 4th one. Looks close in this angle, but not close enough. Yeah, not close enough to get a bolt started straight. And this cast iron transaxle, this is surprisingly easy to cross thread. That stuff is softer than you would think. I say this from painful experience. These ears on the bracket definitely bend over time, but also they're just subject to the force that this thing is under. And these strut rods really have a lot of torque on them, even with no weight on the suspension, just kind of bending them into place. I think in the past, the way I've done this is to lower the back end of the engine down. I really didn't want to do that, but that may be the answer. Every time I think I have a better way, using the jack for leverage and whatever, but not working, so may have to drop the back end of the motor down. And if I do that, I can probably bolt the bracket fully on and then just get the strut rods to slide right into the bracket. This is probably the way we're going to do it. Okay, I think we're pretty much done. So, lowering the back of the engine did the trick. Took just enough of the pressure off and the twisting force off of the arms that I was then able to get all 4 bolts on each side in. I then kind of snugged down the bolts here. Not too crazy, because again, I want to allow a little bit of rotation. You can see that we've got some grease zerks that I've greased up a bit on both sides of this. Forgive the lens flare there. And then I've done a really quick rough alignment by rotating the bars on each side and just checking with the bubble camber gauge. I just used a vice grip and a rag to keep from scratching it up to rotate those. Pretty simple. I do kind of wish that I had flats on these bars. I got these from Speedway. But nevertheless, did the trick. So last bit is just to quickly snug up these jam nuts, keep it from moving too much, and then we're going to call this phase done. Hey, if you're still watching, thank you. I appreciate it. This is a new channel, kind of a new endeavor, hoping to share some of my projects. If you enjoy it, consider subscribing. If you don't enjoy it, that's fine too. I get it. The Corvair will hopefully feature in some more. I'll try and get some driving video and see how much we've improved things. And I've got a few other small projects this summer to do on it. Also, I've got the Frankentruck project from last year I want to get put up so you can enjoy really, really bad decisions on that particular flawless plan. And then hopefully, in the not too distant future, this beast we'll be able to make a little headway on. That's an even worse idea. Maybe my worst. And stay tuned for that. Thanks.